internalized superiority and internalized inferiority. Okay, you should look around the room when we do this too, because it's really great to see kind of who's here. And how many of you are familiar with the terms internalized oppression and internalized advantage? So when I hear about implicit bias, it sounds to me a little bit like internalized superiority and oppression, and maybe a much more sophisticated way of understanding how the brain creates it. But sort of what it means in an applied sense, and I'm an applied person, it feels a little similar. That we somehow have absorbed cultural stereotypes, and they affect our confidence and abilities for ourselves, and they affect our behaviors towards others, and they particularly affect judgments that we make under pressure when our unconscious mind is doing a lot of the work. And that's why, as John said earlier, anxiety is a key, because how many of you have never been anxious? Are you anxious now? How many of you understand what happens when you are anxious in your brain? Yeah. So it's very hard to learn when you're anxious for chemical, hormonal reasons. And the reason, the way I learned this is I did a lot of work around school readiness. And I don't like the term school readiness or ready to learn, because all children are learning all the time. You cannot stop a child from learning. The question is, what is a child learning? And I would give that speech a lot. And a neurologist in that field called me aside and said, you know, Sally, the only exception is if children have been traumatized or if they have high levels of stress, their cortisol levels become uneven and they cannot absorb information to the same extent. And so that was a really profound thing for me to think about. And it seems very consistent with the way John's talking. Now, is there anybody in this room that will say that I don't really, I didn't do that right? I know there may be experts in the room that understand it differently.